There's a moment, somewhere between memory and imagination, when the past feels closer than it should. A scent, a color, a sound from a different decade suddenly floats back to you, and for a brief second, you're standing in a world that doesn't exist anymore. The 1960s through the 1980s weren't just years on a calendar, they were entire landscapes of everyday objects, habits, and small rituals that shaped daily life. And while some relics from that time survive in attic boxes or family albums, countless others have slipped away completely. Today we're stepping back into that world, not to mourn what vanished, but to understand how ordinary things once defined the rhythm of a generation. In those decades, technology, culture, fashion, and convenience moved at a slower speed. Homes weren't automated, screens didn't follow you, and people didn't carry their entire lives in their pockets. What you used every day, whether it was a household gadget, a snack, a tool, or a toy, was built with a particular purpose, often a simple one. And as strange as it may sound now, those seemingly mundane objects carried weight. They organized routines, shaped childhood memories, and brought families together. When something disappeared, you didn't replace it with a digital version. You simply moved on, often without realizing you had stepped out of an era. Take the ordinary errands people once ran. A visit to the corner drugstore meant seeing a spinning rack of paper maps, film canisters, and tiny bottles of flashbulbs. Items so normal at the time that no one imagined they would one day be obsolete. A Saturday morning chore meant picking up fresh ice trays from the freezer, cracking them with a twist only your hands could master. Even entertainment followed a slower rhythm. Families didn't gather around infinite streaming menus, they gathered around whatever was on TV, adjusting the rabbit ear antenna until the picture stopped dancing. That was the charm of the analog world. Imperfections weren't flaws, they were part of the experience. And then there were the sounds. The clatter of typewriter keys echoing across a desk. The mechanical click of a slide projector switching photos in a darkened living room. The chirping tones of a rotary dial spinning back into place as you phoned a friend. These weren't just noises, they were punctuation marks in the daily soundtrack of mid-century life. They filled kitchens, bedrooms, offices, and basements. And when the objects disappeared, the sounds vanished with them. Some items faded quietly as new inventions rolled in. Others disappeared because industries changed, or consumer tastes shifted. Plastic replaced metal. Instant replaced manual. Digital replaced analog. And the world moved forward, never pausing to say goodbye to the small things that had once mattered. But in remembering them now, we return to the places they lived, the wooden TV stands, the pink-tiled bathrooms, the station wagons with no seatbelts, the narrow grocery aisles where brands have long since changed or vanished. These objects weren't glamorous, they weren't luxury items or fashion statements. They were simply part of everyday life, so familiar that most people never thought about losing them. But when they disappeared, something else quietly disappeared with them. A way of living defined by patience, physicality, and the gentle pace of a world with fewer screens and more conversation. So today, we're revisiting those forgotten pieces of the past. Not as artifacts behind glass, and not as curiosities, but as snapshots of a time when life was a little slower, a little simpler, and maybe a little sweeter. Here are 25 everyday things from the 1960s, 70s, and 80s that once lived in almost every home, and then, without fanfare, vanished from the world. The first thing that vanished was the ritual of waiting, an everyday patience shaped by tools that demanded time. Think of the film camera. Not the digital version on every phone today, but the small weighty machine that clicked once, captured once, and offered no second chances. You didn't know if the photo was good. You didn't crop it, edit it, or retake it. You simply pressed the shutter, wound the lever, and trusted the moment. Then came the roll of film carried to a pharmacy counter, tucked into an envelope, and returned days later as glossy surprises. The entire experience depended on anticipation, a feeling that disappeared the moment instant previews arrived. And then there were the encyclopedias, thick sets of neatly arranged knowledge that anchored the shelves of countless living rooms. They were heavy, expensive, and sometimes outdated before they were finished printing, but they were treasured. Children wrote school reports by flipping through those pages, tracing maps, and studying diagrams. Families used them to settle debates long before search engines existed. The disappearance of encyclopedias wasn't just the end of a product, it was the end of a slower relationship with information. One where learning meant searching by hand rather than typing a question. Even grocery shopping had its own vanished rhythms. Supermarkets once filled their aisles with items that no longer exist: metal ice cube trays, glass soda bottles requiring a bottle opener, boxes of flashbulbs stacked beside film kiosks. There were products you bought because everyone bought them: laundry bluing, powdered drink mixes, metal lunchboxes with matching thermoses. These weren't specialty items, they were the architecture of ordinary life. Today, most have disappeared, replaced by safer packaging, new technology, or simply shifts in taste that made them irrelevant. In the heart of the home, the kitchen carried its own set of extinct tools: manual can openers with stiff handles, avocado green appliances, dish soap refills in waxed cardboard cartons, gelatin molds shaped like castles or seashells. Each had a purpose, and each belonged to a visual era that defined mid-century decor. Even simple habits like sharpening pencils with a wall-mounted grinder or writing shopping lists with a stubby golf pencil spoke to a tactile, hands-on lifestyle. When these objects vanished, the small rituals tied to them disappeared as well. Entertainment changed just as dramatically. Families once gathered around vinyl records spun on heavy turntables, needle dropping with a soft hiss. Later, 8-track tapes clunked into car players with a mechanical certainty, followed by the whirring charm of cassette tapes rewound with a pencil when patience ran thin. Each format carried its own sound and its own imperfections, and each vanished as the next innovation arrived. The disappearance wasn't abrupt, it unfolded quietly, box by box, as collections were stored away or donated. Yet the moment the world went digital, the tactile experience of music, the sleeves, the spines, the buttons, faded into memory. Even communication once had a texture we no longer recognize. Desk drawers held addressed books, rotary phones rested on hallway tables, and party lines shared conversations unintentionally with neighbors. There was a dignity to dialing a number by hand, a deliberate pace that vanished with speed dialing and silent screens. Mailboxes filled with postcards, handwritten notes and catalogs rather than automated envelopes. Each piece carried the personality of the sender, something no notification can replicate. And finally, one of the quietest disappearances came with the loss of the neighborhood repairman. Whether it was the TV repair shop, the clock specialist, or the cobbler, communities relied on experts who could mend rather than replace. Their tools, their workbenches, their careful hands belonged to an era where objects lived long lives and were fixed with pride. When disposable culture took hold, those professions and the items they revived faded with them. These 25 everyday things weren't glamorous, but they were anchors. They shaped routines, memories, and the texture of daily life from the 60s through the 80s. Their disappearance reminds us that nostalgia isn't just about what we loved, it's about how differently we lived. And in remembering them now, we glimpse a world built on patience, presence, and the simple beauty of small, ordinary things.